The grand hall of Silvermere fell silent as Lady Kalis Moonshadow collapsed mid-sentence and her elegant form crumpled to the marble floor like a puppet with severed strings, and the elven courtiers gasped because their centuries of composure shattered in an instant, and outside, beyond the crystalline windows, her dragon Ashvir released a bone-shaking roar that rattled every pane of glass in the citadel. Corporal Maya Brooks was one of the few human guards permitted within the inner sanctum, and she was the first to react. And while the elven nobles stood frozen in their shock, she sprinted across the hall, and her boots echoed against stone that had witnessed 1,000 years of history, and she dropped to her knees beside the fallen elf and checked for vital signs with practiced efficiency. Maya called out loud for someone to fetch the healers, and her authoritative tone cut through the paralysis that had gripped the assembly, but even as she called for help, her trained eye caught something the others had missed, and there was a faint shimmer of purple around Kalis' lips, and the acrid scent spoke of something far more sinister than simple exhaustion. The elven High Chancellor named Lord Therendil finally recovered his voice, and he told Maya to remove herself, because this was not her concern. Maya looked up with her jaw set, and she spoke with respect, but told the Chancellor that she was trained in field medicine, and unless she was mistaken, Lady Kalis had been poisoned, and the word sent a ripple of disbelief through the gathered nobles because poison in the High Court seemed impossible and unthinkable. Yet Ashvir cries from the courtyard suggested otherwise, and the dragon was bound to his rider by a connection deeper than mere companionship, and he could sense what the elves refused to believe, and as the healers finally arrived and swept past Maya with haughty dismissal, she remained crouched beside Kalis, and her mind already raced through the implications someone had just attempted to assassinate the greatest war hero of the realm, and this was the elf who had saved both their species from the Void Scourge. Just 3 cycles ago, Maya had a sinking feeling that this was only the beginning of something terrible. The healing chambers glowed with soft amber light as Maya stood guard outside, and she had insisted on remaining despite the protests of the elven staff, and inside Lady Kalis lay motionless on a bed of woven moonsilver, and her breathing was shallow and labored, and the healers had confirmed Maya's suspicions about night veil toxin being used. Captain Lisa Grant arrived within the hour, and she was Maya commanding officer and one of the senior human liaisons, and her weathered face was grim as she pulled Maya aside and told her that the High Council was calling this an unfortunate accident, and they claimed Kalis must have ingested something tainted at the morning feast. Maya said that was ridiculous, because night veil does not just appear in food, and someone with knowledge and access did this deliberately. Lisa's eyes held a warning, and she told Maya to be careful because the elves do not take kindly to outsiders questioning their security, and Maya had already made enough waves by calling it poison in front of the entire court. But Maya could not let it go because she had served alongside Kalis during the Void War, and had watched the elf warrior lead charges that should have been suicidal, and they emerged victorious through sheer skill and the devastating power of Ashvir at her side, and the elven lady had saved Maya life twice. That evening, as the twin moons rose over Silvermere, Maya began her investigation, and she started in the grand hall and retraced every step Kalis had taken before her collapse, and the elf had been addressing the court about the increasing border skirmishes with the Duskfen clans, and this was a topic that had clearly made several council members uncomfortable. In a shadowed alcove, Maya found it, and there was a delicate crystal goblet, still half-filled with elderberry wine, and it was tucked behind a decorative column, and the purple shimmer along its rim matched what she had seen on Kalis' lips, and someone had placed it there knowing Kalis would pause at that exact spot during her speech. A voice came from the darkness telling Maya that she should not be here, and it was a human voice. Maya spun to find Lord Therendil watching her from the shadows, and his ancient eyes were unreadable, and in his hand he held a scroll sealed with the royal crest, and he told her that the High Council had decided that her services were no longer required at the Citadel, and she was to return to the human garrison at dawn. Maya challenged him and asked if it was because she found evidence of attempted murder. Lord Therendil stepped closer and told her it was because she was creating discord during a time when unity is paramount. And for the first time, Maya saw something in his expression that might have been fear, and he told her that there are forces at work here that she does not understand, and for her own safety, he suggested she accept this dismissal gracefully. But as Maya left the grand hall with the crystal goblet hidden in her pack, she knew she had never been good at following orders that did not sit right with her conscience. And somewhere in this glittering city of ancient magic and even older secrets, someone had tried to kill a hero. Maya was going to find out who, even if it meant standing against the entire elven court. Ashvir would not let anyone approach Kayla's healing chamber except for Maya. And the massive silver dragon had scales gleaming like captured starlight, and he had taken position outside the infirmary tower, and his bulk curled protectively around the base. And when the elven healers attempted to enter, he released a warning growl that shook the very foundations of the citadel, and only when Maya appeared, speaking in calm, measured tones, did the beast allow passage. Maya informed the dragon that Kalis was still unconscious, though she was not entirely sure he could understand human speech, and she told him that Kalis was stable, and the healers said the poison was spreading slower than expected. Ashvir's massive head swung toward her, and Maya found herself staring into eyes that held an intelligence far beyond any mere animal. And the dragon made a low, rumbling sound and gestured with his snout toward the mountains in the distance and toward the border territories where Kalis had recently been stationed. Maya realized that the dragon wanted to show her something, and it was something about what happened before they came to the citadel. The dragon rumbled in affirmation, and against every regulation and probably her better judgment, Maya climbed onto Ashvir's back and gripped the natural ridges of his spine, and with a powerful thrust of his wings they were airborne, and they left behind a citadel in chaos as guards shouted and bells rang out in alarm. They flew for an hour past the glittering spires of elven settlements and over forests that had stood since before human civilization began. And finally Ashvir descended into a valley near the Duskfen border and landed beside the ruins of what appeared to be a forward military outpost. The scene told a story that made Maya blood run cold and scorch marks scarred the earth, but not from dragonfire, because these were the distinctive purple-black burns of void magic, and this was a power that should have been extinct since the war ended and equipment lay scattered and destroyed, but there were no bodies and no signs of the soldiers who had been stationed here. In the center of the devastation, Maya found Kalis' command tent still partially standing, and inside, pinned to the war table by an ornate dagger, was a message written in both Elven and Common script that said the treaty was a mistake, and some victories should not be forgiven. Maya photographed everything with her field recorder, and her mind raced because the Void War had ended with a controversial peace treaty, and this was one that Kalis had championed, despite fierce opposition from hardline factions on both sides, and the elf had argued for mercy and for understanding that the void-touched beings were victims of corruption rather than willing servants of darkness. Maya whispered that someone wants to restart the war, and understanding crystallized in her mind, and they needed Kalis out of the way because she was the only one with enough influence to stop them. Ashvir rumbled his agreement, and Maya saw in his ancient eyes a grief that transcended species, and the dragon knew what she knew, and his rider had not just been poisoned by a random assassin, and this was part of something far larger and a conspiracy that threatened to tear apart the fragile peace that had cost so many lives to achieve. When they returned to Silvermere, the Citadel guards were waiting with weapons drawn, but so was Captain Lisa Grant, and her expression told Maya that her commanding officer had decided which side of history she wanted to be. Lisa said quietly to show them what Maya found, and to show them all. The emergency session of the High Council was unlike anything the Citadel had witnessed in centuries, and Maya stood in the center of the Grand Hall, and her field recorder projected holographic images of the devastated outpost onto the crystalline walls, and the assembled nobles watched in stony silence as evidence of void magic and conspiracy unfolded before them. Lord Thorindil declared this was preposterous, though his voice lacked its usual conviction, and he said the void threat was eliminated, and what Maya was showing them must be something else like border raiders, perhaps using stolen artifacts. Maya pulled out the crystal goblet now sealed in an evidence container, and she told them to explain this, and she described how Night Veil toxin was administered in Lady Kayla's favorite wine, and placed exactly where she would pause during her speech about the border conflicts, and this was not opportunistic because someone knew her habits and her schedule and her route through the hall. A younger council member named Lady Bryn stepped forward, and she said that if what Maya said was true, then Maya was accusing someone in this very chamber of attempted murder and conspiracy to restart a war that nearly destroyed them all. Maya replied that she was not accusing anyone specifically, but she was stating facts, and Lady Kalis was poisoned because of her stance on the peace treaty, and that outpost was destroyed by void magic that should not exist anymore, and someone in a position of power had to coordinate both acts. The hall erupted in heated debate, and ancient rivalries and political factions suddenly exposed in the harsh light of crisis. And it was Captain Lisa Grant who finally cut through the noise, and her voice carried the weight of a veteran who had seen too many battles. Lisa said she had fought alongside both humans and elves for 20 years, and she was there when Lady Kalis and Ashvir led the final charge against the Void Nexus, and she watched Kalis risk everything to broker peace instead of pursuing vengeance. And she would be damned if she stood by while cowards tried to undo that sacrifice. A weak voice came from the entrance to the hall, and it said that Lisa spoke well, and the voice belonged to a pale and trembling Kalis, who stood there supported by healers on either side, and Ashvir loomed behind her, having somehow navigated the Citadel corridors, despite his massive size. The council fell silent because Kalis should not have been able to walk, let alone speak, and the Night Veil should have kept her unconscious for days. But the elf warrior eyes burned with determination that transcended physical limits. Kalis said she had been aware through her bond with Ashvir, and she heard everything. And she knew who poisoned her. And she raised a trembling hand, pointing directly at Lord Thorindil. And she revealed he was her own uncle, who never forgave her for showing mercy to their enemies, and who believed victory required extermination rather than understanding. The ancient elf mask finally cracked, revealing not shame but cold resolve, and Thorindil hissed that Kalis made them weak, and the void touch deserved annihilation. Not treaties, and because of her softness they live in the shadows rebuilding their power. And that outpost was just the beginning, and it was proof that the war never truly ended. Maya said that Thorindil decided to finish it by any means necessary, and she described how he would poison Kalis and stage void attacks to blame on the treaty and rally the hardliners and restart the war, and she asked how many others were part of this. Thorindil's silence was answer enough, and this conspiracy ran deep through layers of the elven court and possibly beyond, and guards moved to detain him. But the ancient elf merely smiled. Thorindil laughed bitterly and asked if they thought they had won, and he said the seeds were already planted, and the border clans were mobilizing, and the void-touched settlements were under attack as they spoke, and even if they stopped him, they could not stop what was coming. As they led Thorindil away, Maya felt a hand on her shoulder, and Kalis stood beside her, still weak but unbowed, and she thanked Maya for seeing what others would not and for refusing to accept comfortable lies. Maya replied that they were not done yet, and if Thorindil was telling the truth, they had maybe hours before full-scale violence erupted. Kalis nodded, and her jaw set with familiar determination, and she said they would fly to the borders together, and one last time they would prevent a war that should never begin. Outside, Ashvir spread his wings, ready to carry his rider and her human ally into whatever came next, and the fight for peace, it seemed, was never truly over. The border settlements were already burning when Ashvir descended through smoke-filled skies, and below Maya could see the chaos Thranduil co-conspirators had orchestrated, and there were elven strike forces attacking void-touched refugee camps while framing the violence as retaliation for the outpost destruction, and it was a powder keg designed to explode into full war. Kalis pointed to the largest encampment, where a group of elven soldiers in unmarked armor were advancing on terrified civilians, and despite her weakened state, the warrior voice carried across the battlefield as Ashvir unleashed a deafening roar, and she ordered them to stand down by order of Lady Kalis Moonshadow and the High Council. The soldiers hesitated, and confusion was evident even from the air, and their commander removed his helmet, revealing the face of Lord Davin, who was another council member, and he called up that Kalis should be dead, and the old ways demand justice, and these creatures corrupted their lands. Kalis countered that the old ways also demand honor, and Maya felt the elf body trembling with effort, and Kalis said that justice without mercy is simply revenge, and revenge without end is extinction for all of them. Maya had been working frantically on her communicator, and now she looked up with grim satisfaction, and she told Davin that Captain Grant just arrested 15 co-conspirators in the Citadel, including 4 High Council members, and his coup was over, and he should stand down before more innocents died. For a tense moment, weapons remained raised on both sides, and then a figure emerged from the refugee camp, and it was a tall being with skin that still bore faint traces of void corruption, and these were remnants of the war that had marked so many. And she walked forward with hands raised and her voice steady despite the obvious fear. She said her name was Vera, and she was a soldier in the Void armies and corrupted against her will, and Lady Kalis gave her a second chance at life when she could have executed her. And because of Kalis' mercy, she now teaches orphaned children and helps rebuild what was destroyed. And she asked if this was what they sought to destroy, and children who never chose the darkness that touched them. Other refugees emerged, and there were farmers and craftspeople and former soldiers who bore scars from both sides of the war, and each stepped forward to stand between the weapons and their homes, and not in defiance, but in silent testimony to the redemption Kalis' treaty had made possible. Lord Davin's sword slowly lowered, and Maya saw the moment the reality of what he had been part of truly struck him, and the realization that he had been manipulated into attacking not warriors, but families, and not enemies, but survivors, trying to build something better from the ashes of tragedy. Davin's voice broke, as he said he was told they were regrouping and that they threatened their people. Kalis replied that they threaten only the narrative of those who profit from endless war, and she slid from Ashvir back and stumbled slightly before Maya caught her, and she told Davin that hatred is easier than healing, and fear is simpler than trust, but easy and simple do not make a civilization great, and that requires courage, and the courage to build bridges instead of burning them, one by one. The elven soldiers lowered their weapons, and some wept openly, and the shame of what they had nearly done overwhelmed their training, and the refugees cautiously approached. And Maya watched as ancient enemies began the uncertain work of dialogue, and it was painful and awkward but necessary. Over the next hours, as more loyal forces arrived from the Citadel and news of the failed conspiracy spread, the truth emerged, and Thranduil and his faction had been planning this for years, and using fear and selective information to poison minds against the peace. And they had lost so much in the war that they could not accept an ending that did not feel like total victory. But as Maya helped distribute supplies and coordinate evacuation of the wounded, she realized something profound, and this moment and this choice, to stand down and to question, and to choose peace over vengeance. And this was the real victory, and not the dramatic battles or heroic sacrifices, but the daily decision to build instead of destroy Kalis, collapsed shortly after, and the poison and exertion finally overwhelmed her. But this time, healers from both sides worked together to save her life, and Ashvir stood watch over them all, and he was a living monument to loyalty and hope. 3 weeks later, Maya stood in the rebuilt Grand Hall as Kalis addressed a very different council, and one that now included representatives from the void-touched settlements and human liaisons, and even some of the reformed conspirators who had agreed to redemption over exile. Kalis said they nearly lost everything, and not to external enemies, but to the hatred they carried in their own hearts. And Corporal Maya Brooks, who was a human who owed them nothing, saved not just her life, but the fragile peace they had built, and she reminded Kalis that true strength lies not in the power to destroy enemies, but in the courage to question allies when they lose their way. Maya received a commendation that day, but more importantly, she received something rarer, and it was the friendship and trust of an entire realm that had learned the hard way that peace required constant vigilance, and not against external threats, but against the darkness that could take root in any heart willing to let fear outweigh compassion. When she returned to the human garrison that evening, Ashvir flew overhead, and he was a silver guardian watching over all the peoples of the realm, and a living reminder that some bonds transcended species and politics, and even war itself. The conspiracy had failed, and the war had been averted, and in the process, both humans and elves had learned that the greatest victories were not won on battlefields, but in the quiet moments when someone chose truth over comfort and justice over revenge.